The interstellar transport ship hummed quietly through the dark space between stars. Inside the passenger deck, 12 different alien species sat in their specially designed seats, each one built for their unique body shape. Some looked like giant lizards, others resembled walking trees, and a few had too many arms to count. They were all diplomats heading to one of the coldest planets in known space. Dr. Emily Watson sat near the back corner, looking very small compared to her traveling companions. She was the only human on the ship, and everyone knew it. Her pale skin and short brown hair made her stand out even more among the colorful scales, fur, and strange skin textures around her. While the other diplomats reviewed their electronic tablets and holographic displays, Emily quietly read from an old paper notebook that looked like it had been used many times before. The ship's computer announced their arrival time in multiple languages. They would reach Crystal 7th in 2 hours. Emily looked up from her notebook and watched through the small window as distant ice crystals floated past in space. The planet they were approaching was famous for being one of the coldest places where intelligent life existed. The average temperature on its surface was colder than anywhere humans had ever lived naturally. Ambassador Thorn, a tall reptilian creature with dark green scales, walked over to Emily's seat. His species came from a desert world and naturally preferred warm temperatures. But his people had developed excellent heating technology over thousands of years. He looked down at Emily with what might have been concern in his large yellow eyes. "Dr. Watson, I must express my worry about your preparation for this mission," Thorn said in his deep, careful voice. "The Frost Lords we are meeting maintain their cities at temperatures that would freeze water solid in minutes. Most species require full environmental protection to survive there, and humans are known throughout the galaxy for being particularly sensitive to cold temperatures." Emily smiled politely and closed her notebook. "Thank you for your concern, Ambassador Thorn. I appreciate it, really, but I think I'll manage just fine." She patted a small cloth bag that sat on the seat next to her. It looked old and worn, like something a grandmother might use to carry her knitting supplies. Thorn's head tilted to one side, a gesture that showed confusion in his species. "Dr. Watson, with all due respect, the environmental suits designed for this mission are built using the most advanced thermal regulation systems in the galaxy. They have been tested on dozens of ice worlds. Yet you seem to be carrying only standard diplomatic clothing and that small bag of unknown contents." Other diplomats had begun to notice their conversation. A floating, jellyfish-like creature named Ambassador Flo drifted closer, its translucent body glowing with soft blue light. "The human's reputation for thermal weakness is well documented," Flo said in a voice that sounded like wind through water. "Perhaps she should remain on the ship during the actual negotiations." Emily's smile never changed, but something in her eyes became more determined. "My species has survived ice ages, bitter winters, and freezing conditions for thousands of years before we ever left our home planet. I think I know a thing or two about staying warm." She opened her cloth bag just enough to show the other diplomats what was inside. They could see what appeared to be 2 metal containers, some white cylinder-shaped objects, and a small box that looked very old-fashioned. Ambassador Quinn, whose species looked like a cross between a spider and a crystal formation, clicked his mandibles together in what passed for laughter among his people. "Primitive tools will not save you from temperatures that can freeze your blood inside your body, human. This is not a camping trip on your homeworld." The ship's lights dimmed slightly as they entered the shadow of Crystal 7th. Through the windows, the planet appeared as a brilliant white and blue sphere covered in swirling ice clouds. Massive crystal formations could be seen even from space, rising from the surface like frozen mountains. The beauty of the planet was undeniable, but so was its deadly cold environment. Emily stood up and gathered her belongings, including the mysterious cloth bag. "I understand your concerns and I appreciate that you all want to keep me safe. But every human learns certain things from their grandparents and great-grandparents. We learn about times when there was no electricity, no advanced heating systems, and no environmental suits. We learn how people stayed alive using nothing but their wits and a few simple tools. The ship began its final approach to the landing platform. The computer announced that external temperatures were now being measured at -68 degrees and falling as they descended through the planet's atmosphere. The various alien diplomats began activating their environmental suits. Lights blinked on. Heating systems hummed to life, and protective force fields shimmered around their bodies. Emily walked to the window and looked down at the approaching Crystal City. The structures were incredibly beautiful, like someone had carved an entire metropolis from ice and diamonds. Spires twisted up into the pale sky, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of solid frozen air. She could see the Frost Lords, themselves moving through their city. Tall beings that looked like they were carved from living ice and crystal. "It really is beautiful," she said quietly. "My grandmother would have loved to see something like this. She always said that cold was just another kind of weather, and weather was something humans could always figure out how to handle." As the ship settled onto the landing platform with a gentle thud, Emily checked the contents of her bag one more time. Everything was there, just as her grandmother had taught her to pack it years ago during winter camping trips. The metal containers were clean and dent-free. The white cylinders were dry and ready to use. The old-fashioned box had everything she needed inside it. The other diplomats finished their equipment checks and prepared to disembark. Their environmental suits made them look like colorful robots, glowing with indicator lights and humming with power. Emily zipped up her simple jacket and slung the cloth bag over her shoulder. She looked exactly like someone heading out for a walk on a chilly day, not like someone about to step onto one of the most hostile planets in known space. "Last chance to reconsider, Dr. Watson," Ambassador Thorne said, his voice coming through his suit's speakers. "The rescue equipment is prepared if you change your mind." Emily walked toward the airlock door as it began to open. Cold air rushed in immediately, and frost started forming on the metal surfaces around the opening. "Thank you, Ambassador, but I won't need rescuing. Sometimes the old ways work better than all the new technology in the galaxy." The landing bay doors opened with a sound like breaking glass, and Emily Watson stepped onto the most beautiful and deadly surface she had ever seen. The floor beneath her feet was made of polished ice that reflected everything like a perfect mirror. Above her head, the ceiling curved upward in impossible arches that seemed to be carved from single pieces of frozen crystal. Everything glowed with a soft blue light that came from somewhere inside the ice itself. The cold hit her like a physical blow. It was the kind of cold that made the air feel sharp in her lungs and made her skin tingle immediately. Her breath came out in thick white clouds that hung in the air for several seconds before slowly fading away. The temperature reading on the wall showed -72 degrees and still dropping as the Frost Lords adjusted their environment for the meeting. Behind Emily, the other diplomats emerged from the ship in their full environmental suits. Ambassador Thorne looked like a walking furnace, with heating coils glowing red along his arms and back. Ambassador Flo had surrounded himself with a shimmering bubble of warm air that distorted everything around him like heat waves on a summer day. The spider-like Ambassador Quinn had extended heating filaments from his crystalline body parts, making him look like a walking chandelier. Their equipment hummed and whirred constantly, working hard to keep their bodies at safe temperatures. Warning lights blinked on several of their displays, indicating that the cold was already pushing their systems to their limits. Emily stood among them, wearing nothing more than her standard diplomatic clothing and a simple winter jacket that looked like it had come from an ordinary clothing store. The Frost Lords themselves began to appear from various entrances around the landing bay. They moved with a sound like wind chimes mixed with breaking icicles. Each one was unique, but they all had the same basic appearance of living creatures made from ice and crystal. Their bodies caught and reflected light in ways that created rainbow patterns on the walls and floor around them. Some were tall and thin like frozen trees. Others were broad and solid like ice sculptures. The largest Frost Lord approached the group of diplomats. His body was a masterwork of natural crystal formation, with spires and angles that seemed to follow mathematical patterns. When he spoke, his voice was like music played on glasses filled with water. "Welcome, warm-blooded visitors, to our humble world of eternal winter. I am Lord Glacies, Speaker for the Frost Council. We trust that your thermal protection systems are adequate for conducting business in our traditional environment." His glowing blue eyes moved across the group of diplomats, taking in their various heating systems and environmental suits. Then his gaze settled on Emily, who stood perfectly still and calm despite the deadly cold around her. Lord Glacies tilted his crystalline head in what might have been curiosity or surprise. "The human appears to be either remarkably brave or remarkably unprepared for our climate. We were informed that your species requires significant thermal assistance to survive in temperatures such as these." Emily smiled and reached into her cloth bag. The other diplomats watched nervously as she pulled out the two metal containers, the white cylinder-shaped objects, and the small, old-fashioned box. Several of them started to move forward, probably planning to pull her back to the ship if she collapsed from the cold, but she raised her free hand to stop them. "Thank you for your concern, Lord Glacies," Emily said, her voice steady and clear despite the clouds of breath that accompanied every word. "My species has learned many ways to survive in difficult environments. Sometimes the simplest methods work the best." She knelt down on the ice floor and opened the first metal container. It was nothing more than a large tin can, the kind that might have once held soup or vegetables. Inside were several of the white cylindrical objects, which the other diplomats now realized were ordinary candles. Emily arranged them carefully inside the tin can, making sure they were evenly spaced and stable. Ambassador Thorne's environmental suit speakers crackled as he tried to communicate his concern. "Dr. Watson, what you are attempting cannot possibly generate sufficient thermal energy to protect you from these temperatures. The physics simply do not support such a primitive approach to heat generation." Emily opened the small, old-fashioned box and removed what appeared to be a book of paper matches, the kind of matches that people had used for hundreds of years before. Electronic ignition systems were invented. She struck one match against the rough strip on the outside of the matchbook, and a small orange flame sprang to life. The flame danced and flickered in the cold air, but it did not go out. Emily carefully lit each of the candles inside the tin can, one by one. The small flames grew steady and bright, casting a warm, golden glow that contrasted sharply with the blue ice light of the Frost Lord city. Lord Glacies and the other Frost Lords moved closer to observe Emily's actions. Their crystalline bodies chimed softly as they walked, creating a musical accompaniment to Emily's simple work. They had never seen anyone use such primitive technology, and their curiosity was clearly growing. Emily took the second metal container, which was identical to the first, and carefully turned it upside down over the burning candles. She left a small gap around the bottom edge to allow air to flow in and keep the flames burning. Almost immediately, the metal began to warm up. The heat from the candles trapped inside the enclosed space started to create a pocket of warm air around the improvised heater. Emily picked up the device and held it close to her body. The warmth spread through her jacket and into her hands. The color returned to her fingertips, and her breathing became more relaxed. What had been a potentially deadly situation was now manageable, all thanks to equipment that could probably be bought at any basic supply store in the galaxy. The alien diplomats stared in amazement. Their sophisticated environmental suits were working harder and harder to maintain safe temperatures, consuming power at an alarming rate. Meanwhile, Emily had created her own personal heating system, using technology that was probably older than spaceflight itself. Lord Glacies extended one crystalline hand toward Emily's improvised heater, stopping just close enough to feel the warmth radiating from it. "Remarkable," he said, his voice carrying notes of genuine admiration. "Your species continues to surprise us with your resourcefulness. We had expected you to be the most vulnerable member of your delegation, yet you appear to be the most comfortable." Emily held the warm tin can heater close to her chest and looked up at the towering crystal form of Lord Glacies. Around them, the other diplomats continued to struggle with their environmental suits as warning lights blinked and power levels dropped steadily. The sound of their heating systems working at maximum capacity filled the ice chamber with a constant mechanical humming. "This little heater was something my grandmother taught me to make when I was about 8 years old," Emily explained, rotating the tin can slowly to warm different parts of her body. "She lived through some very hard winters when she was young, before modern heating systems were common in rural areas. Power lines would go down during ice storms, and families had to find ways to stay warm using whatever they had available." Lord Glacies leaned down to get a closer look at the simple device. His crystalline features reflected the warm orange glow of the candle flames, creating patterns of light that danced across his face. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise and practical person. We Frost Lords value such qualities highly, but how does such a primitive device generate sufficient thermal energy for survival in our environment?" Emily smiled and held up one of the extra candles from her supply. "Each of these candles burns at about 1,500 degrees. When you put them inside an enclosed metal space like this tin can, the heat gets concentrated instead of just floating away into the air. The metal absorbs the heat and then radiates it outward, creating a warm zone around the heater. It's the same principle that your people probably use in your crystal heating systems, just using different materials." Ambassador Flo drifted closer, his jellyfish-like body pulsing with concern. "But Dr. Watson, the fuel consumption rate of such a system must be enormous. How can you possibly maintain adequate thermal protection for an extended period using only small combustible cylinders?" Emily reached into her cloth bag and pulled out several more packages of candles. "My grandmother taught me to always pack more supplies than I think I'll need. She used to say that being prepared was more important than being comfortable." She opened one of the packages to show dozens of additional candles, all neatly wrapped and protected from moisture. "These will burn for hours each, and I brought enough to last for several days if necessary." The Frost Lords began to gather around Emily in a loose circle, their crystalline bodies creating a natural windbreak that helped keep the warm air from her heater from dispersing too quickly. Their musical voices harmonized as they spoke to each other in their native language, clearly discussing what they were witnessing. Ambassador Thorne took a step forward, his environmental suit systems beeping urgently as they struggled to maintain his body temperature. "Dr. Watson, while your resourcefulness is admirable, surely you must realize that you are taking unnecessary risks. Our technological solutions may be more complex, but they are also more reliable and predictable." Emily knelt down and carefully replaced 2 of the candles that had burned low with fresh ones. The process took less than a minute, and the heat output remained constant throughout. "That's true, Ambassador Thorne. Your suits are definitely more advanced than my grandmother's. Camping tricks, but they're also more complicated, which means there are more things that can go wrong with them." As if to prove her point, Ambassador Quinn's environmental suit began to emit a warning tone. One of his heating filaments had malfunctioned due to the extreme cold, and his internal temperature was beginning to drop. He clicked his mandibles together in distress as he worked to reroute power to his backup systems. Lord Glacies observed this with interest. "It appears that complexity brings both advantages and vulnerabilities. Your simple solution, human Emily, seems to be more stable than the sophisticated systems your colleagues employ." Emily stood up and walked closer to the Frost Lords, her tin can heater providing a consistent warm zone that moved with her. The other diplomats watched nervously as she moved away from the relative safety of the landing area, but she seemed completely comfortable and confident. "My grandmother lived through the Great Storm of 2847, Emily said, referring to a weather event that most non-humans wouldn't know about. The power was out for 3 weeks, and temperatures dropped to dangerous levels even inside buildings. She kept her entire family warm using heaters just like this one, plus some blankets and common sense about conserving body heat. She demonstrated by adjusting her jacket to create better insulation around the heater, then showed how she could warm her hands by holding them near the metal surface without touching it directly. The key is understanding how heat moves and how to control it. You don't need complicated technology if you understand the basic principles." Lord Glacies extended one of his crystalline appendages toward Emily's heater, stopping just far enough away to feel the warmth without risking damage. To his ice-based biology, "We find your approach fascinating, Dr. Watson. Our people have developed sophisticated methods for controlling thermal energy, but we have never seen such efficiency achieved with such simple components." The other Frost Lords began to move closer as well, their bodies chiming softly as they walked across the ice floor. They formed a loose semicircle around Emily, clearly intrigued by her demonstration. Meanwhile, the alien diplomats continued to struggle with their environmental systems, several of which were now showing critical power levels. Emily pulled out her old paper notebook and showed it to Lord Glacies. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, sketches, and diagrams that had obviously been added to over many years. "This belonged to my grandmother and her grandmother before that. It contains hundreds of simple solutions to common problems. Ways to purify water, methods for preserving food, techniques for staying warm, tips for finding direction when you're lost. All knowledge that was passed down from people who had to survive using their wits and basic tools." Lord Glacies carefully examined the notebook without touching it, his crystalline eyes reflecting the warm light from Emily's heater as he read the handwritten pages. "Such accumulated wisdom is precious indeed. We Frost Lords believe that the most valuable knowledge is that which has been tested by time and necessity." Emily closed the notebook and returned it to her bag, then checked her heater to make sure the candles were burning properly. "My grandmother used to say that, Fancy. Solutions were fine when they worked, but simple solutions worked even when everything else failed. She taught me that the best technology was technology you could build, maintain, and repair yourself using materials you could find almost anywhere." As if to emphasize her point, Ambassador Flo's environmental suit suddenly flickered and went into emergency mode. His warming bubble collapsed, and he began to sink toward the ice floor as his body temperature dropped rapidly. The other diplomats immediately moved to help him, but their own systems were struggling so hard that they could barely maintain their own thermal protection. Emily walked over to Ambassador Flo and held her tin can heater close to him. The simple device immediately began to warm the air around the distressed alien, helping to stabilize his condition until his emergency systems could reboot. "Sometimes the old ways really are the best ways," she said quietly. The diplomatic meeting moved from the landing bay into a magnificent ice chamber deep within the Frost Lord city. The walls curved up into a dome overhead, and the entire space was carved from a single massive crystal that reflected and amplified light in ways that made everything glow with soft rainbow colors. Ice sculptures lined the walls, each one depicting important moments in Frost Lord history. Emily walked comfortably through the chamber, her tin can heater providing steady warmth as she examined the beautiful artwork around them. The other diplomats followed more slowly, their environmental suits working harder than ever to maintain safe temperatures in the deeper, colder parts of the city. Several of them were already showing signs of power depletion, and Ambassador Quinn's backup systems had failed completely, forcing him to stay close to the others for shared thermal protection. Lord Glacies took his place at the head of a long table made from polished ice. Around him, 6 other Frost Lords arranged themselves according to their traditional council formation. Their crystalline bodies created a symphony of musical tones as they moved, like a choir warming up before a performance. Emily sat directly across from Lord Glacies, while the other diplomats found seats along the sides of the table. "Before we begin our formal negotiations," Lord Glacies announced, his voice carrying clearly through the crystal chamber, "we wish to better understand the human approach to problem-solving. Dr. Watson, your demonstration in the landing bay has intrigued us greatly. We would like to hear more about your people's methods." Ambassador Thorne shifted uncomfortably in his environmental suit. As the senior diplomat on the mission, he had expected to lead the discussions. His species had been conducting interstellar diplomacy for over 1,000 years, and he had personally negotiated dozens of important trade agreements. Yet the Frost Lord seemed far more interested in talking to the human with her primitive heating device than to him. Emily set her tin can heater on the table beside her, where it continued to radiate warmth in a small circle around her position. "I'd be happy to share what I know, Lord Glacies. But I should mention that I'm not really the senior representative of this delegation. Ambassador Thorne has much more experience with interstellar trade negotiations than I do." Lord Glacies turned his glowing blue eyes toward Ambassador Thorne, for a moment, then back to Emily. "Experience with negotiations is valuable, certainly, but we are more interested in your species' approach to challenges. The way you solved the thermal protection problem suggests a fundamentally different way of thinking about difficulties." Emily carefully replaced one of the candles in her heater with a fresh one, maintaining the steady heat output. "Well, humans have always had to deal with environments that weren't quite right for us. Our home planet has extreme weather, dangerous animals, and limited resources in many areas. We learned early that survival often depends on being able to adapt quickly, using whatever materials are available." Ambassador Flo, who had recovered from his earlier system failure but was still operating on emergency power, leaned forward with interest. "But surely your people developed advanced technology to overcome these environmental challenges, just as all spacefaring species have done." Emily nodded. "Of course we did. We have excellent heating systems, environmental controls, and protective equipment. But we also kept the old knowledge because we learned that complicated systems break down at the worst possible times. Every human child learns basic survival skills from their parents and grandparents, just in case the advanced technology fails." Lord Glacies made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, which Emily had learned was their equivalent of thoughtful humming. This suggests a culture that values both innovation and tradition. Most species we encounter tend to abandon older methods once newer technology becomes available. The formal negotiations began with standard discussions of trade routes, resource availability, and shipping schedules. But Emily noticed that the Frost Lords continued to direct most of their questions to her rather than to the more experienced diplomats. They seemed particularly interested in human manufacturing capabilities and problem-solving approaches. "Your people's reputation in the galaxy is somewhat contradictory," observed Lord Crystal, one of the younger Frost Lords. "You are known for being physically fragile and environmentally sensitive, yet your species has successfully established colonies on worlds that other races consider uninhabitable. How do you explain this apparent contradiction?" Emily thought about this while she adjusted her jacket to better distribute the heat from her simple heater. "I think it's because other species look at our weaknesses and assume that makes us unable to adapt. But humans have always been good at finding ways around our limitations. We might not be able to survive in extreme cold naturally, but we can learn to make fire and build shelter. We might not be strong enough to fight dangerous predators, but we can make tools and work together." Ambassador Thorne finally spoke up, his frustration evident even through his suit's voice modulator. "Dr. Watson, while your philosophical observations are interesting, perhaps we should focus on the specific trade agreements that brought us here. The Frost Lords have valuable crystal resources that our coalition needs, and we have manufacturing capabilities they require." Lord Glacies turned his attention to Ambassador Thorne. "Indeed, Ambassador, the trade agreements are important. But We have found that successful long-term partnerships depend more on understanding our partner's fundamental nature than on the details of specific contracts. Dr. Watson's approach to the thermal challenge reveals much about human reliability and resourcefulness. As the hours passed, Emily's tin can heater never failed her. She periodically replaced spent candles with fresh ones from her seemingly endless supply, maintaining consistent warmth while the other diplomats struggled with increasingly frequent system malfunctions. Ambassador Flo's suit had completely shut down twice. Ambassador Quinn was sharing power from Thorne's unit, and even the robust Scolari environmental systems were showing signs of strain. The irony was becoming impossible to ignore. The most technologically advanced diplomatic mission in the sector was being undermined by equipment failures, while the human with her grandmother's camping tricks remained comfortable and ready for business. Lord Glacies stood up from his ice chair, his crystalline body creating a cascade of musical tones. We have made a decision regarding the trade proposals. We are not only willing to accept the terms as presented, but we would like to modify them to include preferential status for human-manufactured goods. Furthermore, we would like to request that future diplomatic missions include human representatives as primary negotiators. Ambassador Thorne's environmental suit speakers crackled with static as he tried to respond. Lord Glacies, I appreciate your interest in human participation, but surely the technical expertise of our coalition's senior diplomats would be more valuable for complex negotiations. Lord Glacies turned back to Emily, who was calmly tending to her candles. Dr. Watson, would your people be interested in establishing a permanent diplomatic presence on Crystal 7th? We believe that humans might be uniquely suited for long-term assignments in challenging environments. Emily looked up from her heater, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I think my people would be very interested in that opportunity, Lord Glacies. We've always been good at making ourselves at home in places where others might not expect us to survive. The journey back to the transport ship was quiet and thoughtful. Emily walked beside Ambassador Thorne as they made their way through the crystal corridors of the Frost Lord city, her tin can heater still providing steady warmth, while his environmental suit continued to struggle with power management. The other diplomats followed behind them, their various heating systems creating a chorus of mechanical sounds that echoed off the ice walls. Ambassador Thorne finally broke the silence as they approached the landing bay. Dr. Watson, I owe you an apology. When I saw you preparing for this mission with nothing but that cloth bag and those primitive supplies, I assumed you were either naive or unprepared. I was wrong on both counts. His environmental suit's speakers carried a tone of genuine respect that had not been there at the beginning of their journey. Emily smiled and patted the cloth bag that hung at her side. No apology needed, Ambassador. Your concern was completely reasonable. Most species probably would consider my methods primitive and unreliable, but humans have learned that simple solutions often work better than complex ones, especially when you're dealing with unexpected problems. As they entered the landing bay, Emily could see their transport ship waiting for them with its airlock, open and warm air flowing out. The contrast between the deadly cold of Crystal 7th and the comfortable environment of the ship was striking, but Emily had remained comfortable throughout the entire mission, while her technologically superior colleagues had struggled constantly. Ambassador Flo drifted up beside them, his jellyfish-like body still glowing faintly from his suit's emergency power systems. Dr. Watson, I must admit that I am curious about something. You clearly understood the risks of this mission, and you could have requested the same environmental protection that the rest of us used. Why did you choose to rely on such a simple solution instead? Emily paused near the ship's entrance and looked back at the beautiful crystal city they were leaving behind. The Frost Lords had gathered to see them off, their bodies creating rainbow patterns of light that danced across the ice architecture. Lord Glacies raised one crystalline arm in farewell, and Emily waved back before answering Flo's question. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the early human space explorers, Emily said. The first people who left our home planet and went to live on other worlds. They didn't have fancy environmental suits or advanced life support systems. They had to survive using basic tools, practical knowledge, and a lot of creativity. She always said that humans succeeded in space not because we had the best technology, but because we knew how to make do with whatever we had available. Ambassador. Quinn clicked his mandibles thoughtfully as his crystal-like body reflected the ship's interior lighting. But surely you understand that advanced technology is more reliable and efficient than primitive methods. Your tin can heater worked in this situation, but what if the conditions had been even more extreme? Emily reached into her bag and pulled out several additional items that she had not needed to use during their visit. There were extra metal containers of different sizes, various types of fuel tablets, chemical heating pads, and even some materials for building a more substantial shelter if necessary. My grandmother taught me to always have a backup plan, and a backup for the backup. Simple technology is easier to repair and replace, but you still need to be prepared for different situations. As they boarded the ship and settled into their seats for the journey home, the other diplomats began to process what they had witnessed. The human had not only survived in conditions that pushed their advanced systems to the breaking point, but she had thrived and remained comfortable throughout the entire mission. More importantly, her simple solution had impressed the Frost Lords enough to completely change the terms of their trade agreement. Ambassador Thorne removed his environmental suit helmet as the ship's atmosphere controls brought the temperature back to comfortable levels. His reptilian features showed signs of exhaustion from the stress of fighting his suit's constant system failures. Dr. Watson, I have been involved in interstellar diplomacy for 37 years, and I have never seen a negotiation turn around so completely based on such a simple demonstration. Emily carefully extinguished the candles in her tin can heater and packed everything back into her cloth bag with practiced efficiency. The Frost Lords value practical wisdom over complicated technology. They probably saw something familiar in my approach that reminded them of their own cultural values. Sometimes the best diplomacy happens when you show people that you understand what's really important to them. The ship's communication system activated, and they received a message from the Frost Lord Council. Lord Glasses's musical voice filled the passenger compartment as he spoke. Human vessel, we want to thank you for an enlightening diplomatic encounter. Dr. Watson's demonstration of human adaptability and resourcefulness has given us new respect for your species' potential. We look forward to future collaborations. Within days of their return, word of the tin can diplomat had spread throughout the galactic diplomatic network. Emily's simple solution had become the subject of analysis and discussion in training academies across a dozen star systems. Military. Strategists wanted to understand how humans could survive in extreme environments using minimal resources. Trade negotiators were curious about the psychological impact of demonstrating practical competence during business discussions. Emily found herself invited to speak at conferences and training seminars, but she always insisted that the real credit belonged to her grandmother and the generations of humans who had developed and preserved practical survival knowledge. She would demonstrate the tin can heater technique and explain the basic principles behind it, but she always emphasized that the true lesson was about the value of simple, reliable solutions. The trade agreement with the Frost Lords became one of the most successful partnerships in recent galactic history. Human colonies were established on several ice worlds that other species had considered too hostile for long-term habitation. Human engineers began working with Frost Lord crystal technology to develop new heating systems that combined advanced materials with simple, reliable designs. 6 months after the original mission, Emily received a personal message from Lord Glaces. The Frost Lord leader had learned enough human language to write his own words rather than using translation software. Dr. Watson, your grandmother's wisdom has taught our people much about the value of preserving traditional knowledge alongside modern innovation. We have begun recording and teaching the old methods our ancestors used before crystal technology, so that future generations will have simple solutions available when complex systems fail. Thank you for reminding us that the most powerful tools are often the simplest ones. Emily smiled as she read the message, then looked at the photograph on her desk that showed her grandmother teaching a young Emily how to make her first tin can heater during a camping trip many years ago. "You would be proud, Grandma," she said quietly. "Your old camping tricks just changed interstellar diplomacy forever."